and I make over 3 years $92,000. That is awesome. You've done a flip, you've done a very good job. It's beautiful. You sold it. Yes, congratulations. Your $53,000 profit is basically cut almost half. You're now down to 30K profit. You want to figure out a way to triple your profit. Initially, as a flipper, you're stoked at this price and you go, I realize you got to sell it or you want to sell it. Ah, crap, I'm just going to make 30. What if I try this method where I turn my flip into rent own and I turn around and I get monthly cash flow. The tenant's responsible for repairs. The tenant's giving me a sizable down payment. I can sleep at night knowing that if they were to leave in the middle of the night, I've got their deposit up front. I know the house is worth, this number, and then I sell to them and I make over 3 years, $92,000. That's pretty amazing. Hey, everybody, welcome here. Welcome to week 5 of the How to Summer Series Lease Option Real Estate Investing. I'm your host, Cam Rowland. I'm pumped to be here because I love doing this stuff, love teaching others these very creative strategies. So tonight, we're going to be talking about how to turn a flip into 3 times the profit by turning it to RTO or rent-own, a lease option. And those of you new, lease option, rent-own, basically same term. Lease option is the legal term. So that's what I use with my tenants. All the paperwork is lease options. But for the purpose of simplicity, we'll exchange those back and forth interchangeably. All right, so you might be on here going, well, what's the problem with a flip? So flips are fantastic, right? You've got so many different strategies. You've got buy, rent, and hold. You've got a wholesale. You can flip. You can do a BRRRR. You can do lease options, flipping, all sorts of different strategies with we're primarily talking about single family dwellings here. You can do that most of this stuff with multifamily and that stuff too. But for simplicity's sake, we're going to be talking about houses here. And so I personally have done a lot of flips, and some of the flips have been awesome and some of the flips have tanked for me. So I've learned some hard lessons, lost money, and I want to be able to share that with you. So tonight we're gonna dive into, I'm gonna give you a real specific example of how I've 3 times my profit doing an RTO, from a flip to an RTO. All right, so with this, I'm going to share some of my experience of my steps doing a flip and figuring out the numbers and if it's profitable or not. Obviously, we don't want to do these if it's not profitable. So we're going to walk you through that. I'm excited that Dave Shimko is going to be on again with us tonight. Dave's got some great examples of his own on these deals and how he's turned a flip into much more profitable than just keeping a flip. So what's a problem with a flip? And by the way, this picture here, this is an example of one of the properties that I'm going to be unpacking the numbers on. And this was, the yellow was the before kitchen. The picture in the middle was the after. And this was super exciting because it was just beautiful and the whole house was just fantastic. So what is the problem with the flip? So obviously one of the problems with flipping is not knowing your numbers and losing money when you sell, which is a problem that lots of people have. And sometimes, a lot of time, that is in your control, meaning that you should be able to speculate what your costs are going to be, what needs to be done, all that sort of stuff. So create a budget and you say, okay, $52,000 is my budget plus a 10% contingency fee on top of that, right? So a little over 56K is going to be my budget for this. And here's it, break it down, all that sort of stuff. Sometimes, especially newer flippers, don't know of all the things that need to be done because oftentimes you run into surprises and that just happens. So that's one of the issues. Another issue is your market changes. And back in week 1, Kyle talked about doing no money down deals, and they had a flip that the market had shifted, right? The real estate market was going up and all of a sudden it flattened out and maybe took a little bit of a dip. So their numbers weren't working anymore. And Kyle showed us how he took that deal, and which was supposed to be a flip, and salvaged it by doing one of these rent owns. So those are a couple of issues that can happen. I'm going to walk you through some real basic numbers that happen with flips. And so these are rounded numbers. They are from this project that I'm showing you here, these kitchens. So they are real life, but I'm not going to give you, pennies and all that sort of stuff. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to walk you through the start of this deal. And this is where I started out with this property. So I started out this property and I found it off market through a friend of a friend. Basically, hey Cam, I know someone who's selling. Are you interested? Yes, let's talk. Long story short, after about 2 weeks, I negotiated a purchase price of $207,000. So I did my due diligence, got in a contractor, got in an inspector, all that sort of stuff. I figured that I needed $65K to do the renos. Okay. So that's what I did up front. Fast forward, and I won't go into all the details. We had some surprises and we had some other stuff that went smoother, but we were right around the 65K mark. And basically when we were done, we got it reappraised for $325,000. Okay, so that was a little bit higher than what I thought it was, and I was happy. So how much profit is that? Give or take $53,000. Is that a good flip? Yes or no? Yeah, that's really good profit. It's really good profit. So what's the problem with that? Okay, fair question. I'm glad you asked. So here's the deal. If I have got this property and I'm flipping it and I'm going to sell it on the multiple listing service, right, through a realtor, because I want to get top dollar for it. And MLS says that they're the best search engine to get the most exposure to the most buyers. Okay, let's believe that. And so we want to do that. So let's put it on the open market. So what happens now, we're done the renos. What are all the expenses that we incur the moment that we are done renos and it's ready to go and you gotta do stuff, right? So what about staging? Okay, so there's staging and you might not do that. That's okay. But for the purposes of this, let's say that we'll do staging because I think that does help it sell faster. There is a vacancy cost. Those are a number of things, right? They are utility costs, utilities, your financing costs, right? Taxes, insurance. That looks like financing. That's my way of writing financing. So what is that? Okay, so staging costs, let's ballpark that. 1,400 square foot house like this, let's say that's going to be $1,500. I negotiate to 15. Maybe they wanted to, but it's like, come on, can we do 15? Okay, utilities and holding costs. So let's run that at about $1,300 a month. So I'm taking that in terms of the money I've got into it. If I've got to pay any debt servicing on that, utilities, taxes, insurance, might actually be a little bit higher because sometimes when you got a vacant property, you got to pay higher insurance costs. It can be double or triple, but you get a good mortgage broker that goes to bat for you. My mortgage broker, he'll make any phone call that I ask him to make and he'll try to sweet talk people so we get great rates. So there's vacancy costs. What else is there? Let's see. The big one. What's the big one that I'm missing right here? Goes on MLS, got to pay the realtor fees. So let's just put that at 5%. How long is a vacancy cost? If it's going to cost me $1,300 a month, if it's going to cost me $1,500 a month, no, $1,300 a month for vacancy, how long is it going to be? Is it going to be a month? Is it going to be 6 months? We don't know. So we're going to take some averages here. And let's just say that it took us 2 months to sell it. That's not bad, actually. To sell it in 2 months, that's about a median type time to sell a property. Now, we've just come through a bunch of hot markets. And yeah, stuff has been selling within days or weeks, but let's just say it's going to take 2 months. The people don't want to move in until another 2 months. Oh, that's 4 months of holding costs from me. So what is that? That is $5,200. So this times 4, it's $5,200. Okay, and then we got $1,500 for staging, and let's see here, 5%. Let's just say we sold it at the $325. Some of you have already got this figured out in your head already, but I can't present and do math at the same time. So 325 times 5% is 16,250. Okay. So let's just ballpark this. What is that? 22 and change. Maybe let's just round it up to 23. Okay, so 23, you've done a flip, you've done a very good job. It's beautiful. You sold it. Yes, congratulations. Your $53,000 profit has basically been cut in almost half. You're now down to 30K profit. Is that good? Maybe for you, maybe for me. It's kind of depends. But you came on to this, you're watching this because you want to figure out a way to triple your profit, right? So all said and done on this deal, if I had sold it, my profit would have been around $30,000, which is good. It is good, absolutely. But oftentimes people make much, much less than that when they finally sell it and they lose money, which is not great. So this is a fairly healthy example, but I want to show you how you can triple that. So what I want to do, let me just go back here for a second. So I want to keep talking about, the problem of the flip, and then I want to move into, how do you solve this? Because for some of you, 30,000 may not be a problem. It may be like, well, dude, if I'm doing 30,000 profit, I'm good. Thanks for the webinar. See you later. I want to show you how I can do so much better than that and duplicate it over and over again. So at this point, I want to bring on Dave Shimko. So he's a student as well as a friend, and Dave's doing some great things with his partner. And so what we want to do is we want to talk about this together. Dave's going to come on here and talk about some of his experiences with doing some of these flips and turning them into rent on. So Dave, welcome here.
Hey, Cam. Hey, everybody else.
Great to have you on again.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So you've done a bunch of flips. Tell me about them.
Yeah, we have done a bunch of flips. We're getting better and better at them. Some have been pretty good, just like you read up in your real estate investing book, and others have been not so good. So the big thing for us is, knowing your market, knowing what a house is going to sell for, and then being able to get an accurate construction cost nailed down when you buy or before you buy the house, right?
Right.
And the construction cost is probably the wild card because finding a good contractor is difficult. And then even if you have a good contractor who will stick to their price, you start opening up stuff inside the house and you find a lot of out of scope items. So we've had a range of successes with our flips.
That's good. That's what often, you hear from people as a range. And I think, another point you didn't mention, well, you alluded to it, but is really managing the contractors, right? You said, will they stick to their price? Well, yeah, that's one. The struggle I've seen with myself and lots of other people is, will they show up to the job?
Yes. Timelines and schedule for sure.
But the more flips you do, the more you get on top of that stuff and you put systems in play. And lots of people who are watching this have got flipping experience and know a lot about flipping but this whole idea of, making it more profitable. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I asked you to come on to this, is because you've had some fantastic success with this. So I know you've got a couple of different examples. Which one do you want to dive into?
I think the one I like to dive into is one we completed it last year and turned it into a rent to own. And that was kind of our plan right from the hop. Before we get into that, I guess now what we do when we evaluate a property, a flip into a rent to own is always one of the strategies we look at.
Okay.
So does this make sense to do a flip into a rent to own to essentially extend the project and keep it generating profit for us? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one project I can talk about here, it was in Regina here, 850 square foot bungalow. We actually bought it off another investor in town. They wholesaled it to us. So
okay.
It's pretty interesting. We have wholesaled a few properties, but we've also bought a few from wholesale. So separate note, it's kind of cool. You never know where a deal is going to come from or your relationship can work with someone.
Totally.
So we bought the house and it's pretty standard, basically full gut for a flip. And this one we thought, based on the location, based on the fact to be a 4-bed, 2-bath, you know, we thought it'd be a very good rent to own. Like, when it was going to be done, if you look at the house, you're like, yeah, that's a great rent to own. That's a house that families want to buy.
Right.
So for this particular one, our exit strategy number one, as it's always good to have multiple exit strategies on the property.
Yes.
Exit strategy number one is to flip it and then turn it into a rent to own. Exit strategy number two would have actually been just to flip it and sell it. If we had wanted some cash or were in a cash crunch at that particular moment, we could have also pulled the pin. But it worked out for us that we were able to flip it. We actually did pretty good with our numbers. Our numbers were great on the renovation side. The schedule was pushed back by about 4 months. So that cost us about an extra, that one was about $2,000 a month to carry during the rental. So when it was done, we actually started bringing advertising for a rent to own clients when it was done.
Nice.
And it's quite interesting. We tried to bring them in quite early in the process, but when the houses still had quite a bit of construction to go, I don't think people could envision what it was going to look like. And we got everybody basically just said, no, I'm not interested, type of thing. We basically kept kind of doing that. And then basically kind of right when the house was finished, like boom, that week we had someone sign up. So would they have liked it anyways? Was it because the house was finished? I don't know, but the better the house shows, I think the better chance you have of success at that one. So we were able to generate some flip profits, if you will, and pull some cash out of the deal at the end of the renovation. And then we turn it into a rent to own. And that one in particular, in general terms for the numbers, our projections were to make about $25,000 on the flip portion. Had we kind of sold through a realtor and everything like that, which is pretty good. That's kind of our particular ballpark for when we do flips. But we were able to pull out about, I forget the exact number. It was about $25,000 after the flip project, and then continue on with the rent to own. And over 3 years, we're projected to make an additional $30,000.
Wow.
So
okay.
So yeah, we essentially, by leaving our money in there, we have a great asset that we're in control of, and we doubled our money or a little bit more.
Okay. So are you saying that you did the renos and then you refinanced with the bank?
This particular one, we actually got an investor on board and sold it to them.
Okay.
But it's essentially the same strategy, right? We shifted from our private investor who funded the flip essentially to another investor. So at that point, we had the option to refinance with the bank ourselves and keep it going that way. Or by bringing in an investor, we were able to pull some of that cash from the future to the present and then split the rent to own profit with them over the next 3 years.
Okay. So basically what I hear you saying is that you did a flip and you figured out your numbers and you were pretty good within your numbers. But you didn't sell it on MLS, but you sold it privately, I'm assuming.
Yes, that's correct.
To a new investor.
Yes.
Now, didn't this investor just want to run their own thing in it, or like?
Nope, they wanted to invest in real estate but not do any work.
Okay.
So yeah, they wanted to be completely passive, but they still like the real estate in general and the returns you're offering them.
Okay. So basically, you, with one product, created multiple sources of income, right? So not just the flip, but you did the flip and then you packaged it, you put a bow on it and presented it to a new investor, say, hey, if you buy it at this price, here's what you'll get in return. And you kept the house in your program as a rent to own.
That's right.
Okay.
So basically with one house, we were able to do the flip, get a lump sum profit at the start or after a couple months.
Yeah.
Then we were able to get cash flow. We were cash flowing on that one about $330 a month cash flow.
Okay.
3 years. And then there'll be another lump sum at the end when the tenant buyer purchases it.
And how does your investor feel about This whole plan that you put before them, this cockamamie idea that you presented to them. How do they feel about this?
Right. Well, there's lots of moving parts for us. It's a lot more simple to the investor.
Mm-hmm.
They're buying a newly renovated house, in this case, top to bottom. No, nothing's going to come up. It like new furnace, new shingles, new windows, new everything, new electrical panel, all that kind of stuff. So they're getting a great asset that secures their investment, right? Go buy in the stock market, your stocks go poof, get devalued. What do you have for it?
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. So
Nothing.
they're happy to have the physical asset that's in great shape, and they get a monthly rent payment from us every month that provides them with cash flow as well. So,
So if I'm a flipper listening to you, what are the benefits of this for me? Like I could have just got out and made my 25K.
yeah, I mean the reason we look at this all the time is okay, so you're doing a real estate investor and you want to keep churning that money, keep making that money, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you can buy a house, flip it, $25,000 to get out. Then you have all the legwork, all the renos, everything like that to find your next one for $25,000. Or you have this house that you know inside and out, you can just use that to create your next project and get another 25, 30, $35,000. Like you already have that house, which is a large part of a successful investment.
Yeah, because oftentimes what you're saying is that sometimes it's hard just finding the right house that
Mm-hmm.
cash flows.
Yeah, exactly.
And now this is a property that you've been inside and out from front to back. And so you know the property well and you're working with a new investor to essentially refinance the deal, but so you can pull all your capital out,
Mm-hmm.
but now you're still involved with it because you're looking after the house on behalf of the owner and they're getting, I'm assuming, double digit returns.
Yep,
But then you're also receiving cash flow because you're putting a tenant buyer client in there who will eventually qualify to purchase the house.
that's right.
So, a couple major savings that I see there are when you sell to the investor, you don't have realtor fees, which is significant. And then
Mm-hmm.
again, when the tenant buyer qualifies and buys it, it's also a private sale. So you don't need a realtor at that point either. It's another savings at that point.
Definitely. And that's the reason we actually sold the house to the investor below market value. But since there's no realtor fees, we still made our projected profit.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another protection that or the investors protected in that manner,
Right.
right? All our investors, I consider their money more valuable than mine, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do what needs to be done to make sure it's a success for them. So by them buying it under market initially, even if something happens to the rent-owned clients down the road, we could just throw this on the MLS at a later date, but we have that bit of equity already built in that would essentially cover our sale costs.
And have you done more than one of these?
We've done one where we continued to hold ownership and just did a refinance.
Okay.
And we've done one full flip to rent to own. We just got another property under contract last week. We might flip that into a rent to own as well. We're going to kind of do the renovations and see where things sit.
Mm-hmm.
So the great part about this is depending on your current cash requirements, if you need to pull the trigger and sell, sure. But if you're in a position where, there's a little bit extra cash and you can extend that out, then you can make a lot of profit. Because if you do a flip and sell right now for $25,000, or in 3 years, you get a total of $50,000 from the whole deal, right? Where else can you put $25,000 to double it in 3 years?
Yeah.
If you know, send me a message. Right. So that's essentially what we're doing is for us and our like internal numbers, that's whatever 30, 33% rate of return. Like
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
that's a pretty darn good rate of return.
That's awesome. And you start doing multiple of them, then it's just a matter of, you got the systems in play and you got to feed the properties in, you got to find the great tenant buyers and finding investors too, right?
And it's
So,
kind of like filling the pipeline, right? Because if
yeah.
you do one every, whatever, if you did one every 6 months, And in 3 years they start to close, then you're starting to realize double all your profits
Hmm.
continuously. So, or more.
Yeah. And I mean, that's if you're doing a flip. I mean, oftentimes some properties you just don't even need to do a flip.
Mm-hmm.
And they're turnkey, whether they're clean and they're pretty or they're clean and they're dated, but move in ready. I've even done it where it was clean, but it looked dirty and it looked dated and was able to fill it because of the upside for the tenant buyers. Okay, cool. So that last one you did, essentially, not the one that you sold, but the other one essentially was like a burr where you bought
Yep.
it, you repaired it, you rented it, and you refinanced it, and then you pull your cash out. You can repeat it, right? That's a burr, and that's
Exactly.
for long term holds. You're looking at this more of a not a as long of a long term hold, but more of what we've discussed as a burrito, right? Where you do a burr, but you turn it into a rentone. So BRRRTO, rentone. And that's a great strategy. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more here. So if you got any questions for Dave, please just put them into the chat, and I'll just kind of explain this deal. It's because I'm driving to the point of how you can triple your profits. Okay. So if you remember from like 10 minutes ago, these were the numbers that I walked through on this house that I showed you the picture of the before and after with the kitchen. And after everything was done, after all the work was done and realtor and all that stuff, I was figuring 30 grand profit. So rather than selling it, and I knew this ahead of time, I've done flips, and sometimes flip is the best exit strategy for a number of reasons. As Dave said, it's better to have multiple exit strategies because really what that does for you leaves your options open. And really, the more exit strategies you can think of on a property that you're acquiring, the more likely you're going to make more money because you might say, "Well, I'm going to do this as a burr." It's like, "Oh man, I could wholesale this today for 20 grand, or I could do a burr on it and in about 6 or 8 months time I could make 40 grand." Or so to wholesale it, to burr it, to flip it, to do a lease option, rent own, these are all exit strategies. And so the more your brain understands this stuff, the more opportunities and the more problem solving that comes in. Because often what happens for me is a lot of my deals I pick up are often deals that have been picked over by people who have not had as much experience. And they look at it with a flip lens. This can't be done as a flip. Or they look at it as a buy, rent, and hold lens. It's just not enough money to do this as a buy, rent, and hold. It comes to me. And fortunately, also what happens during that time is time has passed and the owner is selling it's like looking for solutions. Can you solve my problem? So the more sophisticated you get with doing these deals, the more you can come into it and go, well, we could do one of these three things. And so I don't give all that information to the seller, but what I'll do is I will often present the seller with two options. One is usually a cash option, which is a lower number, or a more creative one where there's more money down the road, but I get favorable terms today. And so these are all exit strategies. So when I looked at this property and I said, hey, I can make 30 grand on this property, I also went, well, this is a great house in a great neighborhood. The 4 bedroom plus den, after the flip, it's a 4 bedroom plus den, 2.5 bath house with a gorgeous kitchen, gorgeous hardwood floors in a fantastic neighborhood right across the street from elementary. So I was like, I think this would make a fantastic rent home. So what I started doing was because I kind of knew that was my primary strategy that I wanted to achieve, about 2 months out from us finishing the property, I started showing it. And so Dave talked about, sometimes people can't see through the mess to see what it's going to become. Typically, there's two things I like to do. I like to show it kind of after all the gross stuff has happened, tearing down drywall and there's junk everywhere and it looks horrible and the drywall's back up and mudding and taping's going on and then maybe painted started, maybe not, but now it's starting to smell like a new build in there because you got the mud going on And if you got a crew that can keep it clean and you can walk through and you can show them. Plus, if you've done a couple flips before, bring your iPad with you or whatever, or some photos and just say, here's what some of our other projects have looked, and this is going to look very similar to that. So people can start to imagine. So I love doing this. I love showing the properties just kind of as they enter that state of starting to smell much better and they're starting to see some color and they can start to envision that. Now, there has been times, this is the other way I do it. Sometimes I'll get a tenant buyer, right? Someone who wants to rent own a property who's smoking hot, and they're like, "Come on, you got to show me something." Literally, people are like this, and so I do my pre-qualifications, make sure they got some money to put down, and verify their income and stuff like that. It's like, well, I do have this property, but I don't know. It's in rough shape right now. Like it's going to be great once it's done, but it's rough right now. I don't care. I don't care. I want to see it. So you set their expectations, right? If I go, oh yeah, I've got this property, it's going to be awesome, and then they get in there and I haven't prepped them for it and it smells. I typically won't get people in there when it smells, but it's a mess and there's no new mud going up, there's no new paint. It's kind of dark and dingy. If I'm not prepping them for that, they're going to be very turned off and they're going to be like, yeah, no, this rent-own thing isn't for me. They're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater thinking, well, if that's what it is, forget it. But if you set up in such a way that this place is a mess, like I wouldn't take my mom here. And so you just kind of say no. But if they keep pushing you and you push back a little bit more, then it's like, okay, well, maybe I can get you in. Let me get back to you. And so now they're prepped. They're mentally prepared. Okay, so those are two ways to get people in because you want to save on, what was it here? You want to save on this number, right? Because essentially what I want to do is I want to get these tenant buyers approved way before we're done the reno so that we can get them to move in right away. So that's the first thing, is that I want to 2 months ahead start promo. So I do that with my advertising. I've got an email list of people that I've accumulated over the years. I send an email blast. Hey, we got this property coming up. It's in this neighborhood. Let me know if you're interested. Here's the basic numbers. So that's the first thing. And then what I do from there is, assuming that they seem decent, they're interested, then I start to pre-qualify them, right? So I'm just trying to remember, I think in week 3, I think it was, I talked about the basics of qualifying tenant buyers, and you got to find the best tenant buyers. And there are great ways to do that, in which I can show you. We don't have time for that tonight, but you want to qualify them because if these are good tenants, they're going to need to give notice. So if we're 2 months out from filling this property and they love it, they can start getting all their material into me now, proof of deposit, all that sort of stuff. And then it can be like, yep, you're approved. Big check mark. You're approved. Next step is for us to meet up and sign the contracts and for you to bring me a bank draft for 10K or 20K or whatever the deposit is, right? And then that seals the deal. So let's say that happens after we met them, we talked on day 1. Day 30, they're approved. They're ready to go. We sign the paperwork. That gives us 30 days for them to give notice to their current landlord and for us to finish the property. So obviously there's a couple moving parts here, but if you've done flipping, these moving parts exist and you know that you can control them by staying on top of stuff. So we qualify them. I found a tenant buyer and had 20K to put down, and she needed a month to transition from her own property. So what she did was, after we signed that, I now had a lease. I had a 3-year lease with this tenant buyer. So I've got a lease. That's one contract. I've got an option. It's another contract. I've got a couple other contracts that we sign up at the front. Then I've got others when they move in, mostly for asset protection. But what's golden about this is that when you're doing a BRRRR, what's the key thing that you need to do when you go back to the bank after all the renos are done? What do they want to see? The bank wants to see that you've got a tenant with a signed lease showing the amount. So 1 year would be good, but I've got a 3-year lease at $2,000 a month. So that is fantastic. I can go to the bank with that information. They're going to get an appraisal. We're going to keep moving forward there. So that's cool. So now with the bank on this one, for me, it got appraised at 325. So for me, with 80% loan to value mortgage for the new mortgage, 80% loan, 80% of the 325 is roughly, 70,000 dollars. Let's bump it up a bit to 75. Okay, so how much did I put into the property? Remember, this was my budget, and that included holding costs and everything. So it was right around that number. So if I'm doing a refi with the bank, are they giving me all my money back? Am I completely all my cash out? No, I'm short by about approximately 10 grand. That's not what I wanted, but it's still pretty good. But I've got 65K back out. I pulled 60K out of the deal. I still own the property. I've got a great tenant buyer in there, and the tenant buyer has given me how much up front? So I've got 20K up front from the tenant buyer. So now what happens with this is that before the tenant moves in, when we sign the paperwork, right, in this kind of period here, whoever the tenant buyer is, a family, they know all the details up front before they sign. And I encourage them to take it to the lawyer, but they know up front that the purchase price in 3 years is not going to be 325. In this particular case, it was 375. So cliff notes on how I came up with that number. I'm a full-time real estate investor. My ear's always to the ground. I'm always listening to what the markets are doing nationally, locally, what the local brokerages are saying, yada, yada, yada. So my brain is a funnel. It's always taking information. And then I find out, well, this is the most important information is, and your realtor can give you this, is what has year over year positive or negative gains on homes. Was it -3% last year, or was it +5? So here in my market, it has been going up, kind of 3 to 4, depending on the city, depending on the area of the city, 3 to 4, sometimes 5%. And then it was jumping up higher than that. And then kind of the second half of COVID, stuff was going up like 10%. So then I project out. So I typically don't take that high, but I take a medium and I go, okay, so if we keep on this trend, that means that the house is going to be worth X amount in 3 years. So that's ballpark how it came up. I can go into a lot more detail on this at a different time. So the tenant buyer signed the contract for 3 years, paying $2,000 a month, putting 20K down, and buying it in 3 years for $375,000. Okay, so here's where now you're thinking like, okay, kind of makes sense. I see some money, but where's the 3 times profit? So what happens in this whole process is that with that, there are no vacancy costs during this time. And secondly, there are no maintenance costs. So why is that? So first of all, no vacancy costs. The tenant buyer has agreed to a 3-year term. Now, can you hold them to that? Maybe. It might be a big pain if they choose to leave early. But they've also given you a 20K deposit up front. So that's your safeguard for the vacancy costs. If for some reason they can't pay rent for a while, or if they flee the program. Now, the no maintenance costs on all of our homes that we do this in with our tenant buyers, we make them responsible for repairs. Sometimes it's up to $500 per instance. Sometimes it's $1,000. Sometimes it is whatever needs maintaining. That's your responsibility. So it's different for each house. But the beauty on this one is we just spent the last 3, 4, 5, hopefully not much longer than that, but sometimes it is, months flipping this property. So we probably upgraded the furnace. We probably redid the roof, or the roof is great. We don't have to redo it. And the hot water tank, we probably redid that. Those are the 3 main things that can go. So I can go forward in confidence knowing that maintenance costs, if there are any, are going to be stuff like plugged toilet or a broken faucet. And these are all minimal things. And we want our tenant buyers to think independently, to think like a homeowner. So we give them a new homeowner's manual that gives them a whole bunch of information, including stuff like that, including we give them our preferred service providers so that if there is a plugged toilet, they don't call this guy over here that charges. So they see, oh, these guys have no clue what they're talking about. We're going to charge them $500. No, we give them this guy over here who's done dozens or maybe even hundreds of rotor rooters for us. It's not a rotor rooter company, but and they charge, $195 for this service. That's very reasonable. So all that stuff. So the maintenance costs are very low on my straight rentals where I've just got a renter in there. They're calling me or they're calling my office to change the light bulbs, let alone plug toilets. And the stuff that comes out of these plugged toilets is like child's toys and all that sort of stuff. That gets expensive. It doesn't take long. If you have experience with rentals, you know that 3 months in a row back to back just kills your cash flow. And you're starting to question whether you got your numbers right and whether or not you want to be in this real estate game because you're tired of receiving phone calls from this tenant that you shouldn't have put in there in the first place. Anyways, I digress. So no vacancy costs, no maintenance costs. So that cuts down on your expenses. Also, there's no realtor fees. Okay. So when I sell to this tenant buyer in 3 years or 2 years, actually I just got off the phone call today with a tenant buyer who's new to our program. They're into the place for 11 months. And he says, Cam, I think we want to exercise our option early. And it's like, yes, that is fantastic. So we're going to start working with our mortgage broker, and then we'll write up the final contract, which is the offer to purchase at the agreed upon purchase price. But there's no realtor fees. So I'm, this 375 on this house is what I project fair market value in the future. So that's not 375 less 5% for the realtor. That's 375 to me, which is beautiful. No realtor fees. So then also what happens during this time is that because if you refinanced it, you got a mortgage on it, you will have 3 years of mortgage pay down. So let's estimate that at about $14,000 on a house like this over 3 years. Okay, so let me just run my numbers here real quick. So back up here, we talked about making a profit of 30. Okay, right here. And that was because we would have sold it. Now, sold it on the open market MLS. So if we don't do that, our profit's going to be 53K. So that's our profit when we started. Now we're selling it so it was appraised at 275, but we're going to sell it for 375. It's another $25,000. Okay. So what's that looking like? Is it looking better? That's looking pretty good. So what is that? That's $78,000. Okay. Keep in mind that we're not deducting what you normally should do on a buy, rent, and hold. You got to have your 5 to 10% vacancy fee, your 5 to 10% maintenance, as well as capital costs. There's no capital costs in here, right? The roof, it's already done. It's already in the deal. So you're doing $78,000, and I alluded on it a few seconds ago. You've got mortgage pay down over the 3 years. So I estimated that ahead of time, but on this deal to be approximately $14,000. So when the tenant buyer buys it after 3 years, your total profit is $92,000. Yay! What is that? Initially, as a flipper, you're stoked at this price and you realize you got to sell it or you want to sell it. Ah, crap, I'm just going to make 30. What if I try this method where I turn my flip into a rent-own or a burrito, turn this into a burrito where I refinance it, and I turn around and I get monthly cash flow. The tenant's responsible for repairs. The tenant's giving me a sizable down payment. I can sleep at night knowing that if they were to leave in the middle of the night, I've got their deposit up front. I know the house is worth, this number. And then I sell to them and I make over 3 years, $92,000. That's pretty amazing. That is awesome. Now, Dave's method that he just talked about he kind of did this, but he split it into two. But Dave essentially didn't sell it on MLS, but he sold it. And I don't know Dave's exact numbers, but Dave sold it without a realtor, so made a higher profit. And then he continued on with the profit. He got an investor, a new investor in here to essentially do all this. But Dave and his team controlled the deal, and Dave made monthly cash flow. Dave got whatever his 20 grand was up front. Maybe it was five, maybe it was 10. Doesn't really matter. You got a chunk of money up front. And then Dave's going to run the deal, and Dave's going to make money, and his tenant buyer is going to make money. I know I'm kind of blitzing all over the place, but what a powerful, powerful strategy, because what I've just showed you, yeah, the first time you do it, it's going to be some work. Absolutely. But now it's like you've gotten up on a bike, you've ridden it, you've gone a couple blocks without, having to stumble and jump to your feet. Now you're riding the bike and you go, I can go further. I can go a mile now. And you duplicate this process. And that's when this becomes, you think this number is powerful, duplicate that 6 times in a year. Then it's just skyrocket. All right, is this making sense? So just to bring this all together, we've talked about what is the problem with the flip. And, for lots of people, it's not. And for some people, at some point, they will run into a problem. And I don't know too many flippers who have continued that haven't run into some problem or have lost some money somewhere along the way. It just kind of happens. But when you learn a strategy like this, how can you solve this, right? So it's really about how can you solve that problem of losing money, or open your eyes to the opportunity, the fact that you can triple your revenue on a flip, right? And we went into a fair bit of detail how to do that, showed you some rough numbers. So what are some of the next steps? So if you want to learn more about this, there's a couple ways that you can go. We do talk about flips, we do talk about buy, rent, and holds. We talk a lot about creative financing, negotiating with sellers, how to find great tenant buyers. And you want to learn this strategy to do no money down deals, to get better cash flow, to take one project like a flip and not just make 30,000, but make 90,000 on it. And next week, we're going to be talking about, how to quit your day job. Next week is week 6 in this summer series. Going to be wrapping up next week talking about day job. I quit my day job doing these lease option deals. It's so creative, doing them without the banks, working with investors, all that sort of stuff. That's awesome. That's where the magic happens. I started with one property and I stumbled my way through it. Then I did my second, and then I did my third, my fourth, and then I did my first lease option and I stumbled my way through that. And then I did my second, and then it grew by 40 in 5 years. But all because I asked questions and I took action. So yeah, and you can do the same too. Hey, thanks so much for jumping on with me tonight. I trust this has been helpful, and I look forward to working with you more. We'll see you next week.